No one ever talks about this, but you're absolutely screwed unless you can stop catastrophizing. Look at this. This is a list of every major health issue caused by anxiety, which is extremely high in people who catastrophize. You have cardiovascular disease, autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, chronic pain conditions, and diabetes. Your health is literally on the line. And here's the craziest part. Most people who are stuck in this catastrophic state can't get unstuck. And that's because of this, what I'd like to call the mind jar. Okay, so before you have a jar with a bunch of different colored marbles. Now these marbles represent different thoughts. Red is catastrophizing thoughts, like everything is falling apart. Now yellow are going to be the overthinking thoughts. What did they mean by that text? Black? Well, that's the doomsday thoughts. What if this never gets better? Blue? Let's call these rational thoughts. I've been through worse and survived. Pink will be the self-compassionate thoughts. I wouldn't be this hard on a friend. And green is going to be hopeful thoughts. What if things actually work out? And my favorite? Purple. Grounding thoughts. Right now, I am safe. Here's the problem. When you're stuck in an anxiety spiral, the jar is overflowing with red, yellow, and black marbles, making it hard to see anything else. And worst of all, the more you focus on them, the more they multiply. This is why so many people can't escape the catastrophizing mindset. So the question becomes, how do you escape this jar? You can't just pull all the bad marbles out. That's not how the mind works. But you can tip the balance. For every red, yellow, black marble you have, you need 5 good ones. That's the magic ratio. 5 pink, blue, green, or purple thoughts for every anxious one. Not 1-to-1, not even 2-to-1, 5. Why? Because negativity is louder. Your brain gives more weight to fear than to calm. This means you have to stack the deck in your favor. Every time you catch yourself spiraling, add a rational thought, a hopeful one, or a self-compassionate one. Again and again and again, until one day your jar looks different, and so does your life. Of course, this is much easier said than done. Realistically, if you're stuck in this mindset, you're not just going to magically hit this ratio overnight. Your brain won't let you. It's spent years reinforcing these patterns. Rewiring them takes time. And at first, it's going to feel impossible. And that's where we'll start. Before you'll see what I'm calling the Triforce. If the goal is to rewire your mind so that you can overwhelm the bad marbles with the good ones, the Triforce is how you do it. Let's start with the top element, something I'm calling anxiety drills. Everyone always says that the way to overcome catastrophizing is to step outside your anxious thoughts and see them as an outsider would. But there's a small flaw in that logic. All right, let's pretend you're going through a breakup, and you think this relationship is the love of your life, so you're going to do everything you can to get them back. There's just one problem. To the people outside the relationship, all they see is how badly this person's treated you. The lying, the cheating, the stealing. One day your friend comes over and points this out to you. It's obvious to them that you shouldn't be trying to get this person back. And on a certain level, you know that. You accept this person isn't good for you, but you can't seem to break free of your emotions. You still want them back. This is the flaw. Most people know that worst case scenario thinking is unhelpful and that they should view their situation as an outsider would, but they just can't. Why is that? Well, I think people hold on to the negative thoughts not because they want to suffer, but because they subconsciously believe that their pain serves a purpose. At first glance, catastrophizing looks like a problem people want to escape, yet they keep doing it, even though they know it's irrational. It's because it gives them something in return. A hidden benefit that makes them feel safe, prepared, or justified. It gives a false sense of control. These individuals will often think, if I expect the worst, I won't be blindsided. But that's the problem, because it keeps them in constant anxiety mode, unable to enjoy good moments because they're always waiting for disaster. So what does this mean, and where do the anxiety drills come into play? Well, if someone deeply believes, if I expect the worst, I won't be blindsided, the usual CBT answers won't cut it because in this belief, it's just not the thought. It's the trauma response disguised as logic. All right, check this out. Let's use another breakup analogy. Sarah just got dumped, but she was always expecting it. She replayed the breakup 100 times, thinking if she expected the worst, she wouldn't be blindsided. And yet, here she is, completely wrecked. The pain still hit, and all she really did is suffer twice. A friend tells her, you think you were preparing for the worst, but what if you were just living through the pain before you had to? She sits with that. It makes sense, but nothing changes. She still catches herself bracing for disaster, assuming things will go wrong before they even start. And then she does something different. She tests it. A week later, she's supposed to meet up with a friend for dinner. Normally, this would trigger the same old thought loop. What if they cancel? What if they don't actually like me? What if I sit there alone, embarrassed, looking like an idiot? Usually she'd prepare for that outcome. Maybe she'd mentally rehearse what she'd say if they bailed. Maybe she'd talk to herself into canceling first, so she wouldn't have to feel rejected. This time, she stops. She reminds herself, I don't have to assume the worst to be okay. I just have to trust that I'll handle whatever happens. And then she goes. No pre-planning, a backup excuse. No anxiously checking her phone every 5 minutes. She just lets it play out. And when the worst doesn't happen, when her friend shows up, hugs her, and they have a great time, she realizes she wasted all that energy protecting herself from a disaster that never came. That's when she finally understands. She doesn't have to force herself into thinking positively. She just has to prove to herself over and over that she can handle life without needing to suffer in advance. In other words, she needs to do anxiety drills. This super similar video I did on exposure therapy that you can see right here. Anxiety drills are mini exposure therapy exercises that retrain your brain to stop assuming the worst and proving that you can handle the uncertainty. Sarah's dinner plan, that was an anxiety drill. Exposure therapy works by gradually proving that the worst case scenario is either not going to happen or not as catastrophic as you had imagined. Sarah always expected rejection, so she lived in fear of it. The drill was simple. Go to dinner without preparing for disaster. She didn't force positivity. She just let reality unfold. And by doing so, she disproved her fear in real time. That's the key. Exposure therapy isn't about stopping anxiety. It's about getting used to uncertainty until it no longer controls you. For someone who catastrophizes everything, they need deliberate anxiety drills. Small, controlled moments where they resist the urge to predict doom and just let things happen. Each time they do this, they collect real proof that their catastrophic thoughts aren't reality. Over time, the fear loses its grip, not because they think positive, but because they train themselves to handle whatever comes. And that leads us to our second Triforce piece, accepting that problems are opportunities. There's this really great podcast called Founders that deep dives into the lives, mindsets, and struggles of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. And I happened to be listening to an episode on Jeff Bezos. And in it, this amazing story about him gets told. So Bezos has this employee who notices a problem at Amazon, something about inefficiency. Anyways, this guy spends all day worried about having to tell Bezos about it. He waits after a few hours, works up his courage, and then goes into his office. He starts telling Bezos the nature of the problem, sort of cringing as he does it, expecting to get yelled at or fired. But the opposite happens. As he continues to explain the problem, Bezos seems to be getting more and more excited. So what's happening here? Bezos has literally changed his brain to recognize problems as opportunities for growth. Instead of reacting with frustration or panic, his instinct is excitement, because to him, every problem is just an inefficiency waiting to be optimized. It's a weakness that can be turned into a strength. Now think about how this mindset applies to catastrophizing. When you catastrophize, you are seeing problems everywhere, but only as threats. You're mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios, bracing for impact, convinced that when something goes wrong, it's proof that everything is falling apart. But what if you trained your brain like Bezos? What if instead of seeing problems as confirmation that everything is doomed, you start to see them as moments to adapt, learn, or pivot? Because here's the truth. Problems aren't proof of failure. They're invitations to level up. The difference between catastrophizing and growth, it's not the presence of problems, it's what you do with them. Now, I know this is a lot easier said than done, but that's sort of where our next Triforce piece comes into play. This is what I call name it to tame it. Bezos doesn't just instinctively react to problems with excitement, he's trained himself to categorize them differently. His brain filters problems through a different mental lens than most people. And that's exactly what name it to tame it does for catastrophizing. It's a way to interrupt the automatic reaction before it spirals. Let's say your brain throws out a catastrophic thought. I'm going to lose my job and end up homeless. Normally, you'd feel the emotional weight of that thought and immediately panic. And because it feels so real, your brain treats it as if it is real. But when you use name it to tame it, you step in and you call it what it is. I'm catastrophizing. Just that one step creates distance. It shifts you out of a reactive mode and into an analytical mode. It tells your brain, this isn't a fact. This is just a fear-based distortion. And suddenly, you're no longer drowning in the thought, you're observing it. And here's where it ties back to Bezos. Think about what his employee expected when they walked into his office to deliver the bad news. They expected to be scolded and to see anger, to witness frustration. But instead, Bezos completely reframed the situation. He didn't internalize the problem as a threat. He named it. Oh, this is an inefficiency. And because he named it correctly, he was able to respond with excitement instead of panic. And that's what you're training your brain to do. Instead of reacting to a problem with fear, you train yourself to label it as something you can handle. Oh, this is my brain catastrophizing again. Oh, this uncertainty is making me uncomfortable. Oh, this is just my brain running worst case scenarios, but I don't actually have the proof that this will happen. And over time, the emotional charge starts to weaken. The same way Bezos trained himself to get excited about problems. You're training yourself to stop being consumed by worst case thinking, because the problems aren't inherently terrifying. It's the way we interpret them that makes them feel that way. And if you can control how you frame them, you can control how you respond to them. The Triforce idea is all about harmony. Pull any one of the pieces apart and it stops working. Your jar gets filled with all the wrong colored marbles. Marbles of doubt, marbles of fear, and catastrophizing. But when you put the Triforce together, when you use all the pieces in harmony, something shifts. The marbles start changing. One by one, they get replaced with the right ones. Marbles of resilience, adaptability, and confidence. The mistake most people make is expecting instant success. They try it once and don't feel an immediate change and assume it didn't work. But that's not how this process goes. Right now, your brain is wired for worst case thinking. It's been reinforcing those neural pathways for years. Every time you assume disaster, you added one marble to the jar, strengthening that habit. So reversing it, that takes repetition. At first, it's subtle. You name the catastrophizing thought, and it feels real. You run an anxiety drill, but the fear is still there. The key is consistency. The same way Bezos trained his brain to light up at problems instead of panic, you're retraining your brain to stop reacting to uncertainty like it's the end of the world. Every time you interrupt a catastrophic thought, every time you expose yourself to uncertainty without controlling the outcome, every time you choose to reframe instead of spiral, you're changing the balance of the marbles. And one day, without realizing it, you'll hit a situation that should have triggered a spiral, and it just won't. Not because the problem disappeared, but because you stopped interpreting it as a catastrophe. And that's the real win. Not eliminating problems, but eliminating the belief that they have the power to control you.